How is everybody? Doing okay? Yeah, can you believe this is our last class that we meet together? I'm trying not to think about it because that makes me really sad, actually. So I'm not gonna focus on that. We'll focus on the scary people behind us, but hopefully everyone's getting in there. What I want to do is just give you a couple of minutes to meet with your group so that you can touch base, kind of figure out a plan if you didn't already. The ones I wrote on the board, Dahmer, Dean, Anissa and Morgan, Kaczynski and Gypsy Rose, I have those presentations. They were emailed to me. I have them loaded and ready on my computer. If there's somebody else who doesn't have, you're not on that list, right, and you have one, if you could send someone up to kind of help me get that ready. Otherwise, take a couple of minutes, meet with your group, and then we'll go from there. I just don't want you trying to load something up here in front of everyone. That's a lot of anxiety. So if you have one other than that, send somebody up. Otherwise, take a few minutes and then we'll go from there. Yeah, you can email it to me, you mean? Yeah, so do that and then I'll see if I can open it. Good morning. Yeah, it should be Setmire. Yes. And then I'll see if I can open it right now.
Because my partner, he sent
One of these people. These are the ones I have.
oh no, I think it's Hinkley.
Okay, no, then no, I did not.
Okay.
Oh, yes, it looks like it might be I'll check in a second. Okay. Let's see. Got it. The Yates, I have the Yates. Yates. Let's see. So it looks like it's just a Word document. Is that's what he sent? Okay. I mean, it's up to you. It's just nice to have something up there to help you, but you don't have to. Okay. Yeah, it was supposed to be like a PowerPoint slide or something like that, but I do have the document that you sent.
Because we have software.
Okay. Yates. Yeah. You can email the file to me if you want. Probably the easiest way to do it. I have to check it. Got it. And if you send it to me, I can make sure I can open it. Let's see here. Okay. Is it Gacy? No, that's not who you had.
No, it's Holmes.
Okay, one sec. Down this. Gacy. All these creepy folks, you know. Okay, Gacy.
I love them.
Okay, let's see if yours is there.
Sweet.
Wanna let me.
Oh, it's under my. It's not under my school account.
That's okay. That doesn't matter. It's really fun. Don't worry about it. Okay, and then no, I don't think anything of it. Okay, and then I will just have it on the desktop for you. It's all set. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. So I've got Holmes and whoever just sent me Holmes, I got it. And it's set. Okay. just like another minute or so, and then we'll get started. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 9. Did you two do it together? So I have it up there. No, we're just here.
Yeah. Background, you can ask them.
Cool, yeah. Yeah, short and sweet. It's like 3 minutes max, right? This is just like, you're just giving a little overview. It's really low stakes, right? But make sure you kind of have a plan of who's gonna talk. You'll come up here either as a group, or you can send one person, send one sacrificial lamb, right? That's up to you, whatever you want to do. It's a good joke for the group. All right, but I'll give you like 1 more minute and then we'll get started, and we'll just go through them until we're done, but like 3 minutes max, right? Keep it short. Are we ready? You look ready. Ready or not, one way or the other. Right. All right. So again, what we'll do is we'll just go through each group, right? And again, please be mindful of time. Try and keep it like you can. And then one other favor to ask, right? It's daunting to talk in front of your peers, right? So let's be really respectful of each other. Don't talk over anyone who's up here. You can ask them questions, that's totally fine, but just give them your full attention so that it's not any harder than it needs to be, right? You probably never guessed this, but I hate talking in front of people too, right? It seems like a weird thing to say as somebody who does it for like their job, but it's daunting, right? It can be a little intimidating. So does anyone want to go first? Yeah, so come on up. Who do you have? Yeah. Okay, so I have them all ready to go for you here. In theory. There you go. And then it's all set and you can just use that. And this is one over here.
Okay. Okay, we'll start on this slide. Okay, hello everyone. My name's Sierra. We have Jeffrey Dahmer. He was born on May 21st, 1960 to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. Lionel, at the time of his infancy, was a research chemist student at Marquette University. And Joyce was a known hypochondriac, suffered from depression, and also tried to commit suicide a couple of times during his infancy as well. So during elementary school, he was known to be a very energetic, very happy child. And it wasn't until right before his fourth birthday that he had a double hernia surgery, which has to do with the abdominal area, that he noticeably became different, more subdued, more timid. And even his elementary teachers have said, this is a very striking difference. Also during that time in elementary school, the teacher had noticed some evidence of abandonment and neglect from his parents. So moving forward, once October 1966 came, they moved to Doylestown, Ohio. And that's when things got a little bit worse. His dad became an actual research chemist, started working more, was at home. The mother became pregnant with her second child, which he was allowed to name. He named him David. But because of this second pregnancy, her mental illness kind of was exacerbated. It became a little bit worse. So he was even more neglected. So moving on to high school down here, he was known to be an outcast. He was only known for quote unquote doing a Dahmer, which is when he would inappropriately kind of reenact someone with special needs, and that would make his peers laugh. But other than that, he was an outcast and started drinking very heavily. This is also when, during his 17th year of life, his parents were going through a divorce. So there were a lot of stressors and a lot of neglect. And right after he graduated high school, that's when things kind of went haywire.
Dahmer. You
Oh.
can forward one.
Oh, I think we need to. Your slide wasn't on this. Is there a way to like read?
That's the only file that.
Okay.
But that's okay, we can put it back on like the main page, it's okay.
I can just. Dahmer was arrested, Dahmer was responsible for the murder of 17 men and boys between the years 1978 and 1991. His typical method of kill was to lure people, typically illegal sex workers, back to his apartment where he would drug them and then murder them, mutilating their bodies after they had passed away. Predating his final arrest for the murders, Dahmer was also arrested 3 separate times for sexual crimes. These arrests included charges of indecent exposure to a minor, lewd and lascivious behavior, and drugging and sexually fondling a minor.
All right, he was arrested July 22nd, 1991, after his intended 18th victim punched him in the face and ran away, flagging down the police. He was charged with 15 counts of first-degree murder in Wisconsin and 1 in Ohio, to which he pled not guilty by reason of insanity. At the trial, his defense argued that he suffered from necrophilia, BPD, schizotypal personality disorder, and psychosis, and these conditions compelled him to commit these murders. The prosecution agreed that he was mentally ill, but argued he wasn't insane at the time he committed the murders. His careful planning and covering up of his crimes indicated he was in control of his behavior and knew it was wrong. Dahmer was eventually ruled to be sane at the time of his murders. He was sentenced to 16 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. And after 2.5 years in prison, he was beaten to death by an inmate wielding a metal bar.
And just to add real quick, I forgot to say, some people think that his interest in necrophilia and all these things began when his father was practicing taxidermy in the garage, and that was a way that they kind of bonded. They would find roadkill and then they would, kind of look at the insides and the entrails and everything like that. And some kind of theorize that that's where his interest in more unconventional things started. So, yeah, that's it.
All right, great, thank you. If you have your page with your names, I will take that and you can give it to me.
Yeah.
All right, who wants to go? Do you have it? Okay, who do you have?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Yates. No. Her name. Great, thank you. Oh, that's okay. I just need your names. That's perfect. That's all that matters. Perfect. I didn't, don't worry about it. This will not. Out of your way.
Okay, I just want to orient myself with the keys. Okay, cool. All right, so today we're going to be doing our presentation on Andrea Yates.
All right, so Andrea Yates was born on July 2nd, 1964 in Houston, Texas, and she had a normal life before the incident. She was just a daughter, sister, wife, and a mother, and had 5 siblings, and she was the youngest. She excelled in her high school, and she was actually valedictorian at Milvey High School. She graduated at University of Texas School of Nursing and got a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. She worked 8 years as a nurse at Anderson Cancer Center, and she was typically a shy lady, and she took her studies very seriously and didn't date until she was actually 23 years old. She experienced her first depression at 24 years old, which was her first love. She met Russell Yates, was her husband, and she married him at 29 years old. And her husband was a disciple of a preacher, Warren Nickety. Don't know how to pronounce that. But that family condemned the Yates family for hypocritical Christian lifestyle. And he said that their children were doomed to hell because the Yates parents, or because Yates was doing some sins. I'm not quite sure what sins they were doing, didn't really specify, but she just had a religious background. And in the church, they preached that married couples should have as many children as possible, and Yates gave birth to 5 children. And after her 4th child, Luke, she felt anxious, was shaking, and had difficulty speaking, and told her husband that she needed help. And then she attempted to overdose with 40 tablets of trazodone, which is a really strong sedative, from her father. And she was rushed to the hospital and was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. And then that was the beginning of her spiral and psychosis. After her 5th child, Mary, she had severe depression, and psychosis runs in her family. She was treated in 1999 with Hadol, and it was 2 years before the incident. And it was medication for schizophrenia, and it was very helpful for her. Hadol is the 1st generation antipsychotic, and it rebalances her dopamine and to improve her thinking, mood, and behavior.
Awesome.
Andrea Yates' most known heinous crime was committed on June 1st, 2001, when she drowned her 5 children in the bathtub of her family's home. Officers who responded to the home after she called 911 testified that she appeared unemotional, unkempt, and soaking wet as she calmly told police, "I killed my kids." One of Yates' best friends testified that she was a sweet friend and loving mother, but after the birth of her 4th son, Luke, she turned into a total zombie who stared into space and couldn't finish sentences. In 2006, Yates was found not guilty for reason of insanity.
Yeah, so kind of talking about the trial proceedings and everything. So after she was arrested, she first pled not guilty by reason of insanity, citing postpartum psychosis. In 2001, a jury completely rejected this and found her guilty of capital murder. So she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. And then in January 6, 2005, a Texas Court of Appeals reversed this ruling. So in 2006, July 26, a jury found her not guilty by reason of insanity.
When Yates was not found guilty due to insanity, she was taken to Kerrville State Hospital. She's still here even today, and George Parnham, her defense attorney, still speaks with her like to this day, like approximately once a week. And it is obvious to him that she is feeling a lot of remorse for her actions, and she brings up her children every single visit she has with him. And also, as for her ex-husband, Rusty, he ended up remarrying and having a son named Mark, but then they eventually divorced too. Life inside of Kerrville Hospital is structured and focused on rehabilitation, and the goal is to facilitate a transition back into society for those afflicted by severe mental health issues. And the overall hope is that Andrea Yates can find peace and eventually get back to her life. But for now, she remains in the custody of the hospital. She has had multiple hearings that could have overturned this decision, but she ended up declining them for the sake of actually having a full rehabilitation process. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, who's next? Who wants to come next? Yeah, okay, come on up. Who do you have? What was that? Oh, okay, thank you. The slender. Okay, here you go. And then you can just rotate like down. And then if you have your paper after.
Wait, it's up and down.
Yeah. There you go.
All right. So this is Morgan Geyser and Anissa Ware. Growing up, they had seemingly normal childhoods as they're both clearly very young. However, after the stabbing during a police investigation, pretrial psychiatric evaluation, Morgan Geyser disclosed that she had been struggling with lifelong visual and auditory hallucinations beginning when she was very young. Weyer was also dealing with issues leading up to the stabbing, where she says that she was struggling with her parents' divorce and her teachers began noticing symptoms of depression. Together, the pair developed a delusional belief system, and together they planned to kill Peyton Lutner and to become Slenderman's proxies.
So quick summary, I'm not gonna read all this, but on May 31st in 2014, they were both 12 at the time. They lured their really good friend Peyton Lutner into a forested area and stabbed her, like, I don't know how many, 19 times, I think. Yeah, 19 stab wounds. She barely survived, crawling to the Interstate 94, flagged someone down and got help. She's still alive today, telling her story. And they both pleaded guilty, first degree and second degree. So Fraser was first degree with intentional homicide and a deal with prosecutors and a judge. They sent her to a psychiatric institute after determining she was very mentally ill. Weyer pleaded guilty to attempted second degree intentional homicide and was also sent to the facility after a jury found she was suffering from a mental illness at the time of the attack. One did all the stabbings, one was just there to witness and plan it out.
She egged her on, basically.
Yeah.
Both of them went to the Winnebago Mental Institute. Anissa was sentenced for 25 years, while Morgan was sentenced for 40 years and has not been released. Anissa was released on early September 13, 2021 because she didn't have any violent tendencies and delusions and extraordinary complaints to treatment and her authorities. Currently, she's under watch in her father's home. Sorry. That's what we said. You just put that twice.
Did we?
Yeah,
Oh,
I guess that's all.
Everything?
Yeah.
I guess that's it.
Yeah, we put 2 cents.
Did you read this?
Yeah, I read that.
Okay, yeah,
Right.
I guess that's it.
And again, the wild thing with it, again, another Wisconsin, all these Wisconsin folks, my mom went home, I'm like, go home, Wisconsin people, right? Dangerous, thank you, okay. Who wanted to, you wanna go next? All right, go back there and then you guys, will be, they have their hand. Who do you, have? Did you sent it to me, right? Oh, that's right. Here we go. All right, and then if you want to, oh, you have the one side. You don't have to navigate anything.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Sydney and this is Ella. And Haley is in our group too. So I'm gonna do a little bit background introduction. So Gypsy Rose is a victim of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Her mother actually had her fabricate her medical condition since she was 3. And then she went through a lot of medical procedures and she was in wheelchair, as you can see, but she was actually perfectly healthy. So in 2011, she attempted to escape from her mother, but she failed because she didn't have any support or resources. So she returned home and her mother kind of beat her up and locked her in her home. So she met her online boyfriend, Nicholas, and they tried to kind of, the boyfriend fell in love with her. So that was, the second picture was when they met for the first time. They went to see the movie Cinderella. So they kind of dress up as the character. And later on, in 2015, they planned 3 escape plan together. But okay, so Nicholas actually claimed that he has a violent character called Victor. And then he kind of persuades Gypsy to just kill her mother so they can kind of escape together. And so that's when they decided to kill Dee Dee.
Yep, in 2015 is when Gypsy invited Nicholas to her home. And while Dee Dee was sleeping and Gypsy hid, Nicholas was the one who actually stabbed Dee. 6 days after that, both of them were taken into custody. Gypsy's trial took place on July 5th, 2016. She pled guilty to second-degree murder, which is any type of unlawful killing done without malice aforethought, but unlike first-degree murder, with malice aforethought, but without premeditation. She ended up serving 85% of her sentence and was released just this last December. As for Nicholas, his trial wasn't until November 16, 2018. He claimed that his motive was being quote unquote blindly in love. He said he was so obsessed with Gypsy that he was manipulated. It was revealed during his trial that he had autism spectrum disorder. His attorneys argued that due to his ASD, he had diminished capacity and below average IQ. They even had a psychologist testify in his defense, but the prosecution called a psychologist as a rebuttal witness. Although he pleaded not guilty, he was convicted of first-degree murder and received a full life sentence without the chance of parole. While Gypsy was still in prison after writing letters back and forth, she got married to a man named Ryan Anderson. After her release in March, the two of them got divorced, but since then, Gypsy's made multiple appearances on social media and different shows. Nicholas Godejohn, who's in Missouri, remains in jail today. 2 years ago, he asked for a new trial, saying his counsel was ineffective, but it was denied. So while Gypsy is free, Nicholas is set to serve out his full sentence. Thank you.
Who do you? Thanks. Good. And then people just go up and down.
The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. That is the first sentence of the infamous Ted Kaczynski's 35,000-word manifesto that served as the centerpiece of his ideology, which would result in him sending 16 improvised explosive devices that would result in the deaths of 3 people in an infamous string of bombings, which gave him the nickname the Unabomber.
So from 1978 to 1995, Kaczynski sent a series of improvised explosive devices to universities, airports, and victims associated with these institutions. These bombs ended up claiming the lives of 3 people and 23 others, or injured 23 others. He sent a total of 16 bombs. A lot of them were very sophisticatedly made. He would purposely mislead the police and FBI, creating very meticulous, untraceable bombs and then throwing off misleading clues. On April 3rd, 1996, Kaczynski was arrested in his cabin deep within the wilderness of Lincoln, Nebraska, where he built with his brother. Within his cabin, the FBI found a bunch of bomb components, journals detailing his crimes, his manifesto, and then a bunch of components to make a bomb.
The first sentence in his manifesto is a good introduction for his motives and for his motivations for his crimes and his ideology. Ted Kaczynski's manifesto documents and details his dissatisfaction for the human species' reliance on technology and the Industrial Revolution. Ted Kaczynski believed that the human species was being corrupted by technology and that the loss of connection with nature has been bad for human psychology. Kaczynski's motivations for his crimes were his ideology, which is centered around a rejection of government and modern technology in favor of primitive and simple thinking called anarcho-primitivism. Kaczynski believed that his own actions were extreme, but were necessary to draw attention to the problems that he believed were caused by the Industrial Revolution and modern technology.
So during his trial, Kaczynski's lawyers initially tried to argue for an insanity plea to avoid the death penalty, but he actually rejected the strategy and instead sought counsel with a new lawyer, Tony Serra, and he decided to try to make his defense more on Kaczynski's anti-technology views. Surprise, surprise, didn't work. Sally Johnson, a psychiatrist at the time, evaluated him and diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. Later, Park Dietz, forensic psychologist, disagreed with the pathology and argued that Kaczynski had schizoid or schizotypal personality disorder. Both of these diagnoses are pretty controversial. A lot of people argue that this was kind of made up to support his defense. Eventually, on January 21st, 1998, Kaczynski was declared sane and competent to stand trial, despite the psychiatric diagnosis, and he would later plead guilty to all charges, leading him to be sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Kaczynski was sent to the ADX Florence Federal Supermax Prison in Florence, Colorado. Due to severe medical complications, with I think it was like a cancer of some kind, he would later be transferred to the Federal Medical Center out in Butner, North Carolina, where he would eventually take his own life on June 10th, 2023. And I think that's it.
Anything else for you? All right, thank you. Chief, that'll work. Who wants to go? Do you want to go next? A few more. Yeah, come on up. Who do you have? 2%. Then you can, oh, thank you. And you could just use that. Okay.
Can I be ringleader? Are we okay with that?
Sure.
Okay, so we have James Holmes, also known as the Joker Killer, which is weird. Okay. I just used the arrows right. Okay, so some background information. So he was born in San Diego, California, which is interesting. And he actually got his bachelor's degree in neuroscience, which is pretty impressive. He was always described as being a very intelligent man and also being really sociable, which is kind of why they don't really know why he kind of did a 180, but he did. So in early 2012, he began seeing Leanne Fenton. She was a psychiatrist at the University of Colorado. And fun fact, she actually lost her license due to him killing all these people because she was unable to basically deem that he was a threat to society. So she's actually in jail right now. So he was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a severe type of schizophrenia, and schizotypal personality disorder, which is related but less severe. Yeah, he went to the University of Riverside, like I said. Yeah, there's not a lot of background information on him. His parents actually kind of locked a lot of the stuff away, which is, I don't know, they're hiding something. But so yeah, that's kind of all I could really find.
He killed 12 people and injured 70 others. 62 were directly injured and 8 indirectly. He dressed in tactical clothing, a gas mask, a load-bearing vest, a ballistic helmet, bullet-resistant leggings, and as well as like gloves and full like combat boots. Set off tear gas grenades in the theater and opened fire on civilians. 76 shots were fired in total, 6 from a shotgun, 65 from a semi-automatic rifle, and 5 from a handgun. Before leaving to go to the theater, he rigged his apartment with explosives, and it was the deadliest shooting by a single perpetrator in the state of Colorado and second deadliest in the state's history.
On August 7th, the jury in Aurora, Colorado sentenced James Holmes to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the 2012 movie theater shooting that killed 12 people and injured dozens others. Holmes was originally offered a guilty plea, but rejected it, costing the American taxpayer $5 million in a lengthy 6-month trial.
After the plea was rejected, Holmes pleaded not guilty for reason of insanity. And both of the psychiatrists there to testify, because the first one, Dr. William Reed, said that he was mentally ill but legally sane, and that his mental illness didn't stop him from forming intent and understanding the consequences of the movements. His defense pleaded mistrial because they claimed that Dr. Reed allowed his opinion to affect his decision. So the second psychiatrist that had testified against him also agreed that he was mentally ill, illegally sane. And he was the one who diagnosed him with what is it? Schizophrenic affective disorder? Yeah. So while the trial was underway, there was an indecision in the case, and two jurors were not able to make a decision, and one of them believed that he shouldn't be given life sentence. So because of that, it eventually led to 12 life sentences and an extra like 3,000 years. So yeah.
There's a photo.
Here is wrong one.
They also mentioned that he looked dazed, and like when he was first taken to court and he stood before the judge, they mentioned that he looked dazed and confused, which and like he was out of it, which added to his whole insanity trial.
Peter, is he still in prison? Yeah, right. So still.
He is, right?
Yeah.
Anything else? All right, thank you. Thank you. He does look very, very shocked, right, a little bit. Okay, next, yeah, come on up. Who do you have? Who's your? Wisconsin.
Again.
All right, here you go. And then, if you hit the down button, it'll take you to.
Okay. All right, good morning. I'm Sophia. We did our presentation on Ed Gein. So who is Ed Gein? He is a American serial killer, also from Wisconsin, during the 1950s. Fun fact, his crimes were super heinous that he inspired movies such as Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Which crimes did he commit? And Mary Hogan, 54-year-old woman, disappeared in December 1954, and November 16th, 1957, Bernice Warden, 58, was reported missing by her son Frank. Frank was a deputy sheriff and was suspicious of Gein. So he had sent authorities to Gein's home that night and were greeted to the gruesome sight of Warden's headless, gutted body hanging from the ceiling. Gein confessed to killing Warden as well as Hogan 3 years earlier. He shot both women who resembled his late mother. Further investigation yielded more shocking discoveries, including organs in jars, skulls used as soup bowls, a belt made of human nipples, and additionally, he admitted to digging up numerous corpses in order to cut off body parts, practice necrophilia, and fashion masks, suits, and skin leggings to wear around his home.
The legal process and verdicts on January 1958, Gein was found unfit to stand trial after schizophrenia diagnosis and was committed to Central State Hospital in Waupun, Wisconsin. 10 years later, early in 1968, Gein was determined fit to finally stand in trial. In November, he was found guilty of Warden's murder. However, he was also found insane at the same time of the murder, and he was also recommitted to Central State Hospital.
Okay, great, thank you. We have two. Okay. You want me to bring the Word document up here?
No.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Just put this up for you.
Today we're going to talk about John Gibson Jr., who was the taxi driver killer. John Gibson Jr. was born into a wealthy family. His father was the CEO of Vanderbilt Energy Corporation. He was an on-and-off student at Texas Tech University, but he eventually dropped out in 1980. In 1975, he moved out to LA to pursue a songwriting career. After his efforts were unsuccessful, he wrote to his parents asking for money while also mentioning a girlfriend who turned out to be fabricated. He made it completely up. In 1976, he returned home to his parents and during the late 1970s and early 1980s began purchasing weapons. He was also prescribed antidepressants and tranquilizers to deal with his emotional problem, but unfortunately he didn't take them. In 1976, he became obsessed with the movie Taxi Driver and the main protagonist, Travis Bickle, who plotted to assassinate a presidential candidate. At the same time, Hinckley became infatuated with the actress Jodie Foster, who played a sexually trafficked 12-year-old girl named Iris. Hinckley also adopted the dress and mannerisms of Travis Bickle, who was played by Robert De Niro. When Foster began attending Yale University, Hinckley moved to a place nearby in order to stalk her. During this time, he sent Foster love letters, poems, and repeatedly called up her messages. He fantasized over killing himself or hijacking an aircraft in order to get her attention. This was when he settled on assassinating Ronald Reagan, which he thought would result in him achieving a place in history and appeal to Foster and make her see him as an equal and make her love him.
So the crimes he committed, he took a revolver, he brought it over to the Hilton Hotel on March 38, 1981, and he shot, and he used all 6 bullets. It shot the President Reagan, a police officer named Thomas Delahanty, Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy, White House Press Secretary James Brady, and Brady was left disabled after being shot with the bullet and subsequently died of his injuries during the hospital. After he was arrested, before he was put on trial, he tried to kill himself twice. And during the trial, he was diagnosed with narcissism, schizophrenia, and schizoid personality disorder. The defense testified for 3 days and mentioned that Hinckley had like a combined various personalities from both fiction and real life, which included John Lennon and Travis Bickle. But he eventually was not found he wasn't found guilty by reason of insanity on all 13 charges that he had on June 21st, 1982. His acquittal resulted in the popularity of the guilty but mentally ill verdict, and he was detained at St. Elizabeth Hospital in Washington, D.C. And he received treatment there until September 2016. He went home to live with his mom, and he's now released from prison, and he's now active on YouTube and Spotify, basically, and still trying to live his songwriting dream, I guess. Yeah. His YouTube's pretty active too.
He tried to do a concert, but people protested.
Yeah.
Everything's a big All right.
Yeah.
All right, great, thank you. Did you give me?
Casey, right? See. We want to see that. Please, say hi.
All right, so this is about John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown. So he was born on March 17, 1942, and he's the second of 3 children. He has 2 sisters, and his parents were John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson. His father was actually an alcoholic and physically abusive to him. He had a heart condition as a child, and most importantly, he was also molested by his family friends. So during his adulthood, he was frequently involved in politics. So every city he would go, he would manage to somehow get involved into the political party that was in the city. And
After marrying, they relocated to Waterloo, Iowa, where Marlon's father purchased 3 KFC restaurants, and they managed them together. Gacy opened up a club in his basement where workers could drink and play pool. He only interacted with men and would get many of them drunk before making sexual advances on them. If they said no, he would say it was a joke or test. Gacy became a member of the Waterloo JCs. They would abuse drugs, do prostitution, watch pornographic videos, and also wife swap. The first sexual assault in 1967 was on a 15-year-old Donald
Voorhees Jr., which marks the start of the series for sexual assault people perform on male minors. He was charged with sodomy on May 10, 1968, and later accused of hiring an assailant for Voorhees. And he also underwent psychiatric evaluation on September 12th, diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. And then he was convicted on the 3rd of December, sentenced for 10 years of Anamosa State Penitentiary. And his wife filed for divorce on December 3, lost contact with his first wife and 2 children. Then he got out of prison on parole just after 18 months of a 10-year sentence for good behavior. I don't know how. And this resulted in him going to Chicago. He bought a house in an unincorporated area with the help of his mother. And everyone from the neighborhood knew him. He seemed like a personable and friendly guy. And he performed as a clown for children in multiple parades. People started to notice that the kids who were working for him doing construction went missing. He raped, tortured, then murdered at least 33 young men. Gacy held the record for the most homicides by a single individual in the US legal history. Then he pleaded not guilty for reason of insanity, and instead he received a death sentence on March 13, 1980, and was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center on May 10, 1994. And that's all. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, so during the trial for his last crime, where he would be sentenced to death, he actually had to spend 300 hours at the Menard Correctional Center in Chester a year before the trial, where multiple doctors would, first he tried to claim to his doctors that he had personality disorders. He claimed to have 4 personalities: the hardworking, civic-minded contractor, the clown, the active politician, and a policeman called Jack Hanley, who he referred to as Bad Jack, and he claimed that Bad Jack detested homosexuality and viewed male prostitution as weak, stupid, and degraded. And basically, during the trial, 3 psychiatrists testified that he had paranoid. Sorry, I always have trouble with that one. Schizophrenia with multiple personalities. The prosecutors did not believe that, and they claimed that he was fully sane and in control of his actions. Then the defense team suggested that all of the deaths were accidental erotic asphyxia, strangely enough. And they also did not believe that, clearly. And after a bunch of victims testified, they decided that he was guilty for 33 years.
Great. All right, thank you. One more, and then we're done. Iowa's Wisconsin adjacent. I'm just kidding. All right, where'd she go? And then it actually work better that way anyway.
We did our research on Francine Hughes, who murdered her abusive husband while he was sleeping.
Some background is Francine was born on August 17, 1947. Her father was an alcoholic. He would beat her mother. She married James Berlin, he went by Mickey Hughes. He went by Mickey. At the age of 16, November 4th, 1963, they had 4 children together: Dana, Chrissy, Jimmy, and Nicole. Her relationship with Mickey was kind of rocky. During their honeymoon, Mickey had thought that her outfit was too revealing and tore her clothing. He beat her often, which led her to seek protection from her parents' house or the police, which had little to no effect. Mickey would run around with other women while he was drunk. He lost the few jobs he bothered looking for. Francine and the children would go days without food, while the older children and her would eat popcorn. The baby would get watered down jelly. In an interview, Francine explained that she thought taking the abuse from her partner is what you were supposed to do, and there was no help. She thought it doesn't matter to anyone. She just
it's just something she has to accept. In 1971, Francine divorced Mickey, but he ignored it. He would still come over and beat her. After Mickey got into a car accident, Francine took him back and took care of him.
So on March 9, 1977, at this time, Mickey was back living with her. They were back together, but not remarried. So that day, Mickey had gotten angry at Francine for wanting to go back to school. She wanted to be a nurse. So he demanded that she burn her books, and then he threatened to destroy her car. Francine called the police, but they refused to help her because they didn't see the abuse going on. And this actually angered Mickey even more. After the police showed up at their door, he said that she was done for, and then he threatened to kill her. He then fell asleep after beating Francine and then raping her. When he was asleep, she rushed her kids into the car before pouring gasoline around Mickey's bed, and then she lit the house on fire before she drove to the Ingham County Jail to turn herself in. When firefighters showed up at the house, Mickey was already dead of smoke inhalation, and Francine was charged with murder. In court, her attorney claimed that she was temporarily insane, and this was actually the first time this defense, which was coined by the psychologist Lenore Walker. It's called bad women syndrome. But so the psychologist Lenore Walker, she did research on abused women in the US and the UK. She found that in intimate partner abuse, women would exhibit denial, guilt, and fear. And this combination, which has since been classed as a form of PTSD, can make discerning the level of risk in a given moment amid an ongoing pattern of trauma difficult. This defense is more commonly used later on in the 90s, but she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Her trial was actually very, it was like very, how do I put this? Sorry. Her case brought awareness to domestic violence, and she garnered a lot of support from feminist activists because domestic violence wasn't really a thing that was talked about. In 1980, she married her second husband, Robert Wilson, and he actually helped her become a nurse. She ended up being an LPN, and once she retired from her nursing career, she would volunteer at nursing homes. She died on March 22nd, 2017, from pneumonia at the age of 69.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. We didn't miss anybody, right? Make sure, if I didn't already get it from you, that I have your sheets with your names on it just before you leave today, so I can give you all credit. And thank you. I know I didn't necessarily give you a choice, but thank you for coming up here and doing that anyway. Really terrifying and interesting group of people, right? And even despite, you know, all of the people that were on that slide, and get back to it here in a second, not very many of them were actually granted, you know, not guilty by reason of insanity. A few of them due to things like being battered or being abused or schizophrenia. But even despite, you know, what seems like obvious mental illness on the surface, it's not always enough, right, to warrant, you know, that verdict. So as we talked about before, what's much more common is like the guilty but mentally ill, or maybe a diminished capacity. But lots of cases with this, there's several more, but these are some of like the bigger, more interesting ones, right? And then there's some people who you would think would be up here, but aren't as well. So any other like thoughts, comments, anything else with these folks or with the first half before we talk about the last couple of slides? I'm stalling on them because it's sad to get to them, right? Yeah.
It seemed to me that like the women generally were granted leniency compared to the men. Is that just with this set of people, or is that like a real thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely with this set of people, right? And I think, you know, if you look historically, there has been more like gentility maybe given to women, especially women who were victims of like abuse. So it seems like that one specific instance and case has garnered more like support or sympathy than some of the others, right? And if you look at their crimes, they were typically very like related to their abuse, like you know, murdering her husband or setting the house on fire while he was sleeping, rather than like other people. So I think that was a factor in it as well, that it was taken out directly on the people who were like in their immediate surrounding. But yeah, it seems like that does definitely get a little more sympathy, right? In the way that it's set up, which it's so controversial, right? This is like a really controversial thing. And anytime there's a case, it just, there tends to be so many back and forth verdicts because of it. Really complicated. Any other thoughts? Anything else? All right, well, thank you. And again, if I didn't get your sheet, just make sure you give it to me before you go. The other side of this coin is how the law affects psychology. And I'm sure I asked this at some point. How many of you are thinking of going into like mental health services in some capacity? A counselor, social worker, something along those lines? Quite a few of you, right? There are rules that protect patients or clients on the other side of the spectrum. So we have how the law affects psychology and how psychology affects the law. So this side is called civil commitment. And we're looking at things like, how do we make sure people get treated properly? How do we encourage people to get treatment, but not force them to get it, but not hold them against their will? Again, just as messy and just as blurry. People have the right to treatment, but they also have the right to refuse treatment. And that is a really difficult balance sometimes to maintain, right? So if you have somebody who clearly needs mental health services and treatment, they have the right to that. You can't put them in a hospital, do nothing, and just hold them there. We did that for years, right? We'd locked people in asylums and state hospitals where they rotted away in their own filth. They didn't receive any kind of like adequate treatment, and they had no ability to get out of there. You could literally have people put in there for any reason. A husband could commit his wife for not having sex with him, right? It was that simple, right? If you go back like 40, 50 years, or I guess a little more than that at this point, like maybe 50, 60 years. So we have this delicate balance of needing to protect people's right to receive that treatment. But if they don't want to receive it, they have that right as well. If they want to be released, right, we have to honor that. Or if they don't want to take a medication that we're prescribing for them, that is a right that they have most of the time, right? Unless we deem them to not be of sound mind where they can't make that decision for themselves, in which case maybe a family member might do it for them, right? Or somebody who's like a power of attorney or power of healthcare or something like that. So we have to walk this very difficult balance of not, refusing to treat people, but not forcing it on them at the same time. And that can be equally tricky as all of the verdicts that we just talked about. There's also an incredible number of ethical guidelines. This is our last slide. It's a big slide, but it's the last slide, right? Again, I get sentimental at the end, right? There are a lot of ethical guidelines, and this is a class that you take if you plan to be a therapist or a counselor of any kind. You'll take a whole ethics class, and it's so messy, right? It's like a case-by-case thing, but there are these bodies of principles and rules that you have to follow as a therapist, as anyone in like a psychology, like profession of any kind. And here are some of the big ones. There are quite a few more, but there are some big ones, and they're up here. The first one seems super basic, but you are permitted to offer advice as a therapist or as a psychologist, right? As long as it is within your scope of knowledge and as long as you can acknowledge your limitations, right? So you are allowed to offer advice. You can go on the radio or a TV show or like whatever and offer advice to people. You can offer advice in therapy. You can't conduct any kind of fraudulent research or publish anything false, right? People lose their licenses or go to jail or they're shunned in the academic community if they publish things that aren't true, right? Making up research. People unfortunately do this all the time, right? And they often get caught for it and it can lead to some consequences. Acknowledging your limitations. This is a big one. If you have a client that you can't work with for whatever reason, maybe you don't know enough about their disorder, or maybe you're not comfortable working with somebody who has that disorder, you have to acknowledge that and refer them to somebody else, right? So it's really important as a therapist that you know what you're comfortable with and what you're not. And that's actually a big ethical guideline. You can testify in legal cases as long as it's based on like, good information that you have founded, right? That's sufficient and substantiated. You may not take advantage of clients or students sexually or otherwise. There's a really interesting like dynamic that happens when you go to a therapist, right? They have what's called like a power dynamic over you. And so you can't have a dual relationship with somebody who is your therapist, right? So let's say I was still a counselor. I couldn't be your counselor and your professor, right? That would be a dual power dynamic. I could have too much power over you that makes you too vulnerable, and I couldn't do that. This is really tricky in small towns, right? When I was doing my graduate studies, I worked at Starbucks for a time just to like finance my, like my studies, right? And also to maintain being well caffeinated during graduate school for free. And I eventually had to quit because my clients would come into Starbucks, right? How awkward, right? I'm your therapist and your barista, right? I can't do that, right? You can't go see your client if they're a dentist and offer you free dental services. You can't go to them because that creates a dual power dynamic. You can't enter into a relationship with a therapist. You have to wait 2 years. So mark your calendar, I suppose, right? Even after one session, you have to wait 2 years before you can enter into a romantic or sexual relationship with a client, or it's considered a violation of like power, violation of those dual dynamics. You can, friendships, right, are a little blurrier, right? But a romantic relationship, 2 years, or you could lose your license or go to jail. Really, really big one. Yeah.
So you have to wait 2 years?
We have to wait 2 years, right? Yeah, so literally mark it down, right? Start a countdown calendar, right? So, you know, and sometimes what'll happen is, you know, a client will come in and there'll be, you know, something present and they'll be like, we have to agree not to work with each other. But you can't have any kind of dynamic like that with a counselor or a therapist or a teacher, right? These things happen in academics as well, right? It's really important for the well-being and safety of that client, right? To not abuse that power. But again, it gets super tricky in small towns, right? Where maybe like there is only one person who has a certain role. You might have to go to another town over to get services if that's the case. There's also this interesting dynamic of like confidentiality and a duty to protect that comes up, right? And what you often see is that, you know, people don't want to go to therapy if they feel like what they're going to share with you isn't safe, right? And so we have this rule of confidentiality. If a client comes to you and they're sharing things with you, you cannot share this with other people. And I have to tell you, this was one of the hardest parts for me of being a therapist, was I couldn't go home and tell my partner about my day. Like, it was so tough for me to go home and be like, you know, she'd be like, how was your day? And I'd be like, oh, I had the like really difficult clients, right? Like I had a guy who's like suicidal and I want to share all this. And you can't, because it's a breach of confidentiality. So what you often see is that therapists go to other therapists to talk about their clients. And they can, because those therapists are often also bound by confidentiality. So what you typically see is that a therapist will consult with someone else about their clients and kind of like process and break that down. And both of them can't share that, but it gives them a chance to kind of talk about things and process it with another person. And as you're going for your license, they actually reward you for going to therapy. Every hour that you go to therapy counts as 2 hours towards your total number of hours you have to do for your licensure. So they encourage that as a way to help you kind of process what's going on. There's one exception to this, though. You have a duty to protect your clients. Anyone know what are the circumstances in which you can break confidentiality? Do you know one of them? Harm to themselves or others? Definitely, that's one. Anyone know another one? Another one. This to do with really young and really old, right? Yeah. Elder abuse or child abuse, right? So if you have any kind of suspicion of elder abuse or child abuse, you have a duty to report that to the police or to like the reporting agency, or if a person says they're a harm to themselves or others. Now this gets really messy, and it's wild to think about this, but you could have a client come to you and say, I murdered 15 people last week, and you cannot legally say a word, right? If you do, you could go to jail, you could lose your license, and you could be in a lot of trouble. But if they say, I'm going to murder 15 people tomorrow, you have a duty to protect and have to share that. So it gets really, really messy at times, right? You can't break somebody's confidentiality. There are ways around it. Like if any of the people they murdered were old or young, you could say they might still be a threat to somebody. But you have to be very careful, which is why, again, therapists often talk to other therapists to get help and advice. There's a whole host of other things like accepting gifts, giving hugs, right? How often you can contact people. There are so many different rules. And the idea behind all of these is to try and help protect clients, right? You don't want them to be taken advantage of or harmed in any way. And you also want to protect the person who's the therapist, right? You don't want them to have to wonder what the gray areas are. But this can get very complicated, especially if you have been working with a therapist for a long time and you know them very well. You start to develop a relationship with them, and it can get a little bit messy. So the whole point of all of these is to try and protect not only the client, but also the therapist as well. And it's a whole course that you take with lots of very gray scenarios that you have to kind of work through. Any questions or thoughts here? Yeah.
These ethics exist which are maintained by
Like a board, yeah. Yeah, so by the American Psychological Association, they have a whole ethical board that monitors all these things. And so people can file complaints to the board. It would be like if you had to do confidentiality, like breaches with a duty to protect, you would call Child Protective Services, or it might be that you refer to that board for what to do. Oftentimes that's the case of you'll call that group of people and be like, I need some advice, I'm not sure what to do, and they'll guide you through it, right? Generally, the idea is that if you act off your best faith effort, your best effort, and you mean well, you're typically okay. But it's usually a governing board within the APA that's in charge of all of this kind of stuff and would enforce it. Yeah. Yeah, so in the United States, it would be from state to state, it's all the same. Any other thoughts or questions here? Really interesting topic, but it's tricky again, especially in places where it's easy to have a dual power dynamic for somebody like a small town and whatnot. So in my last few minutes that I have with all of you, just a couple of reminders, right? So on Wednesday, I won't see you. We'll take our last exam. It's just a third test, right? So it's everything since the last test. It'll be on Canvas, just like the first two. It'll open at 12:01 in the morning and it'll close at 11:59 p.m. So you can take it at any time on Wednesday. Obviously, you'll have this time free. That's the whole point. But if you'd rather sleep in and have a little extra time or a nice breakfast or whatever, right? Think of me if you have a nice breakfast. During the day. There is a study guide on Canvas, like always. And so that is kind of the last piece. So make sure you take that on Wednesday. Make sure you double check your grade. If anything at any point looks incorrect, let me know now. It's a really good time to fix it now before final grades are due. We won't be meeting officially during finals week, but I will be here. So if you would like to come meet with me or check in about your grade or any of that stuff, I'll be here. But that will be kind of our last official thing. So I guess the last thing I want to say is thank you. This has been a great semester. I'm so sad to see it end, but I mean, I'm excited for summer. I'm sure you're all excited for summer, but it is always sad. So I hope I see some of you in other classes. Feel free to say hi if you want to come on my office. I always have gaming, right? I feel like come visit me. I have gaming, right? But have a wonderful summer. Good luck on the final. I'll hang out for a few minutes if you have any questions for me. And yeah, thank you for a wonderful semester.